Good evening. I'm Beth Keller, and on behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're very excited to welcome representatives from several publishers, along with some of our librarians, for our annual Fall Book Buzz. This is a great way to find out about new books. Joining us tonight is Brian Wilson, the rep from Penguin Random House, Annie Mazes, who handles adult library marketing for Workman, and Chris Connolly, the marketing associate for HarperCollins library marketing team. We're also joined this evening by some of our librarians, Catherine, Sarah, and Michelle. They will all highlight new books and recommend what to read next. They'll also be discussing some upcoming titles, so you'll get a sneak peek at what to read this fall and hear which new books they're recommending. Before we start, I just want to note that your microphones and videos are turned off as an attendee. Towards the end of the evening, we'll conclude with questions and answers, and we'll open up the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. It's not accessible now, but it will be towards the end of the evening, and you can enter your questions in the chat box. So for now, to start, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Wilson from Penguin Random House. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here with us tonight. And I want to thank Beth and the Highland Park Library for inviting us and giving us a chance to talk about some books that we're very excited about. So without further ado, my first book that I'm going to discuss, and I hope you can see it, is Share of Me and Major Whittlesley. And the author is Kathleen Rooney, and she lives here in Chicago, and she teaches creative writing at DePaul University. This story takes place during World War I, and it's actually based on true events as well as two true characters. It stars Share Me, who's this adorable little pigeon that's a carrier pigeon, and the Major Whittlesley. The story evolves around a very important battle one time, and they send the pigeon off to deliver a very important note to the Major. He gets it, and it determines the course of the battle, to the point where Share Me turns into a hero, and it actually gets the medal. And today you can actually see Share Me because she's displayed at one of the Smithsonian's in Washington, D.C. The story is told through two different eyes, two different narratives. And it's both kind of heartwarming, a little heart-wrenching at times, and funny. The next book I'm going to talk about, and I hope you can see the cover okay, it's called True Storey. And this is by Kate Reed Petty. And again, I'll repeat the title. It's called True Storey. This essentially is about a woman. She's an adult now. She's a ghostwriter, which means that she writes for other people under their name. She lives a very solitary life. She doesn't have a lot of interaction with others outside of her realm. And we find out why. About 15 years before, when she was at school, she's invited to a party. She ends up going there. She drinks way too much. She blacks out, and 4 boys give her a ride home. They eventually deposit her in front of her family's door at their house, and then they leave. The next day, all these rumors start to fly around about the party and about what happened to her that evening. And some of the rumors are very vicious. She gets wind of them to the point they determine how she lives her life for years to come. And it's only till later that she learns the true story of what happened that evening. The next book I'm going to talk about is called Wicked Sister, and the author is Karen Dion. And this book begins in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and ends up in the UP up in Michigan. It stars this rather young woman, She's been incarcerated for many years. She's at a mental institution because of one day when her parents were brutally murdered. So she's been incarcerated ever since, until one day she starts to find out some tidbits and puzzle pieces about what happened the day that they were murdered. She doesn't remember too much, but she does blame herself a lot on the events that occurred. So she decides when she gets out of the institution, she's going to go up to the UP, to her family's old compound, buried deep in the woods, and trying to find some more clues and try to find out what exactly happened the day her parents were brutally murdered. Along the way, she runs into two people that had pivotal, that were also involved that day. The next book is called Death in Her Hands. This is by Otessa Moshfegh. And if you know this writer at all, she's kind of a dark writer. She writes kind of with a gray cloud around the story, but it's good, and that's just her style as well. So this book stars this woman. She's getting elderly. Her husband dies. She decides to move away, start a whole new life. So she buys this ramshackle little rustic cabin way out in the woods, hundreds of miles away. She, once she settles there, she decides to get a dog. And it's really nice around there. There's woods, there's a lake not too far away from her cabin. So she gets the dog as a companion. One day, she's taking the dog for a walk through these meandering paths in the woods. She stumbles across a note. So she stoops to pick it up. And the note has maybe 5 or 6 sentences on them, but I'm going to read 3 of them. 3 sentences from the note that she finds on the forest floor. It says, her name was Magda. Nobody will ever know who killed her. It wasn't me. And of course, it says other things. So she takes the note, she reads it, kind of digests the note, trying to figure out what it's saying and trying to catch up to her mind. And the note obviously startles her. So she looks around her surroundings, expecting to find a body or maybe a mound of dirt indicating that a body is buried underneath it. She's scared. So she takes the dog, she runs home, she goes back to the little cabin, takes the dog inside, locks the doors, locks the windows, rereads the note 10 or 20 times and becomes obsessed with the words on it because she wonders, well, who's Magda? Who killed her? Who wrote the note? So this is the story of her obsession. The last book I'm going to talk about, I was asked to talk about a book that isn't released yet, that will be coming out very shortly. The book I chose is called, or it's going to be called, The Searcher by Tana French. And it's releasing in early October. And I decided to talk about that book for a couple of reasons. One is that Tana French is a great mystery writer, and she's got great credentials. She's very well revered. And she's known as an Irish author. And this little secret is that she was actually born and raised in the United States. She's just been living in Ireland for a long time. I don't have the cover, but I do, or I don't have the book, but I've got this cover that I hope you can see, even though it's backwards. Tana French, The Searcher is what it's called. Now, The Searcher's about, and this is another reason why I decided on this book, it stars a policeman from the United States, from Chicago. This policeman, he retires from the police force in Chicago. He decides to leave the country and he goes to Ireland. He finds a little house on some property outside of a little tiny village in Ireland. And he's very happy to leave the city, to leave his former life as a policeman. He befriends somebody there, somebody that eventually asks him for help. Their brother is missing. So they ask the former policeman if he would help them look for the missing brother. Well, he's very reluctant to do this. For one, he thought he left his policeman duties behind when he left the United States. He doesn't know the local laws in Ireland. He doesn't even own a gun if it comes to that, if things get dangerous. But he reluctantly agrees to help look for this brother in the end. So that's what he does. And in the interim, he disturbs a lot of people in the village. So that's everything. And I hope I talked about a book that you might be interested in reading and that even you might share with family and friends. So that's everything. Thank you.
Brian, thank you for buzzing about the Penguin books and for giving us a sneak peek too at the new book coming out.
Sure, my pleasure.
They sound great, thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Annie Mazes from Workman to tell us about books that, the new books or books that are coming out shortly.
Good evening. Thank you, Beth, for having me. And thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. I'm Annie Mazes. I handle all of our adult titles at Workman Publishing. We have about 10 imprints, so that it's quite a lot, something for every reader. So I hope there's something in here that appeals to you. First up, I'm going to talk about His Only Wife, which just came out last week, and I am so excited about this book. It features Afi Tekbul, who is a young seamstress living in a small town in Ghana with her widowed mother. One day she is given a life-changing opportunity, a proposal of marriage by the very wealthy family of Alikum Ganyo. She doesn't really know him, she knows of him, but she agrees because this will completely change her world. She really wants to be a clothing designer. She has very real aspirations. She wants to help her mother, who has had a very challenging life since her father passed away. And so this is her opportunity. She doesn't fully realize what she's gotten herself into until the day of the wedding, where Alikum doesn't show up. He sends a stand-in in his place, and then she doesn't even meet him until several weeks later when she's installed in this very plush apartment in the capital city of Accra. They have a connection, and he is a really lovely man, but the thing that she was not told by his family is that he has been in a relationship with another woman for years, and he loves her very much. They have a child together, but the family doesn't approve of her at all, which is why they wanted him to get married. So this is the situation that she suddenly finds herself in, very unexpected. And so moving forward, how does she handle it? So this is, it's a story about a woman coming into herself, realizing what she's unwilling to compromise on. It's incredibly fun, and Kirkus Reviews gave it a starred review and called it the Crazy Rich Asians for West Africa. Peace Medie, this is her debut novel. She is incredibly intelligent and a fierce advocate for women, which is very much a part of this story. This would be for readers of Chimamanda Adichie or Candace Carty-Williams, but I'm a big fan. Next up, we have Storey's Curious Compendium. Storey has been publishing books into the how-to space for decades, and now they've put together a very comprehensive collection for any interest. So there are dozens of useful and intriguing visual tutorials that cover how to carve a turkey, capture a swarm of bees, predict the weather by the clouds, navigate by the stars, keep a nature journal. Literally anything that you could ever imagine or want to do. Booklist Starred Review said, no matter how complex, each skill is broken down into simple steps and expertly explained. So much has been canceled or postponed lately, but the excitement for learning new things doesn't have to be one of them. Storey's curious compendium provides readers with the perfect book to spark a new interest or passion and have a lot of fun along the way, which completely, perfectly sums up what this book is. And that comes out next week. This book, I love, love, love. It's so, so much fun. It is romance meets magic. All the books I'm talking about today I love, so I'm going to be a little effusive. But this is romance meets magic. Beatrice Claiborne is a sorceress, and she desperately wants to practice magic as her profession. She's studied it in secret her whole life. She's incredibly talented and very skilled. But in the Regency era period that she lives in the society, men are the only ones who are allowed to practice magic, and women are literally collared when they are married in order to prevent any harm coming to their unborn children. So Beatrice needs to figure out a way, pardon me, to move forward with this being her situation, but she also needs to get married because her family is in incredible debt and she needs an advantageous marriage in order to help them survive. So through her skills and some luck, she figures out a way, an alternative where she doesn't have to get married and she can practice her magic. It's very unorthodox, but it would allow her to fulfill this lifelong dream. But in doing so, she meets this wonderful man, and they fall in love, and he's incredible. He's so strong and powerful in his own right, and he appreciates and loves her strength, and he's great. But if she chooses love, then she loses this lifelong goal, and if she chooses to be a magician, she loses this great love. So what path does she take? And it just got a star review today from Kirkus that said, an expertly concocted melange of sweet romance and sharp social commentary. Lots to talk about in there too. And finally, I'm going to end on some nonfiction that I am incredibly excited about, and I want everybody to read. Paper Bullets. It's just so good. And it's very exciting to me that there are still things about World War II with all the many books that are written about World War II. There's so much there. But this is a true story. It's the little known tale of two brave, creative women. They were lovers for decades, and they lived in Paris, and they were part of the art scene, and they were very creative. And then in their 40s, they moved to Jersey Island in the British Channel, and that's where they were living when the Nazis occupied the island. And so they very much needed to be part of the rebellion. So they did what they were able to do, and they put these paper bullets, they planted them in Nazis' uniforms or in their cars or in their newspapers that they were going to read. So they were getting up close and personal, which was very dangerous. But these paper bullets consisted of wicked insults against Hitler, calls to rebel, subversive fictional dialogue, anything to demoralize or subvert the troops. Eventually they were captured and sentenced to death, but they managed to survive to the end of the war. And today they are better known by their artist names of Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore. And if you Google them, you will find this incredible gender-bending art that they had made. So this is a book for people who are interested in World War II, art, political resistance, LGBTQ history. Hampton Sides and Douglas Brinkley, two renowned historians, have said so many wonderful things about this book. It's incredibly well researched, but it reads so quickly. There's so much to talk about in it, and it is so excellent. And it got a starred Kirkus review, but it's just tremendous. So I cannot say enough good things about Paper Bullets. But that is it for me. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening.
Annie, thank you for giving us a sneak peek and of books that are coming out and the one book that's out. And it's a great selection, so thank you. Now we're going to hear from Chris Connolly from HarperCollins. Chris is joining us with his signature background. So Chris, take it away.
Yes, I'm always at the beach at heart. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And yeah, I have 4 books, all of which I love. They're all very different and unique. And yeah, fall is going to be good for you as passionate readers. So I'm going to start, let's see, pull my PowerPoint. Okay, so the first book I will be talking about is Wandering in Strange Lands by Morgan Jerkins, who you might know from her New York Times bestselling book, This Will Be My Undoing. And Morgan is just a brilliant cultural critic who always finds a way to pick up a strand, a thread of a story and explore it in unique and just eye-opening ways, you know, asking questions you would never think to ask. And in this case, what's happening is she was considering her mother and her father, her two sides of her family, and how her mother, who grew up on like kind of East Coast, moving around a lot, the tradition of storytelling just really wasn't there. The importance of her family's past wasn't there. Whereas her Southern roots, there was this rich history, this rich oral tradition, and, you know, this dedication to, you know, to maintaining the stories of the culture. So what she does is she looks at the Great Migration, which is when over 6 million Black Americans migrated from the South to the North and to the West, and is looking at that migration and kind of pulling at the threads of what was lost along the way, and looking at her own family lineage and exploring the oral traditions, the religions, the mysticism, just the beauty of this rich culture that was lost to just distance and time. So it's a really powerful exploration of Morgan's life on its own, but also just what it means to be a Black American in the times we're living. This is on sale now, incredibly timely. And again, I think Morgan, she's younger than me. She's probably in her 20s. She's literally the most brilliant cultural critic I've ever come across. Really funny as well. This is a beautiful book. So I hope you do check it out. That's Wandering in Strange Lands by Morgan Jerkins. Oh gosh, okay, Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. So if any of you like horror or metafiction or anything of that sort, this will completely win you over. This is about a real life book it's the Diary of Mary McLean, which is one of these bad books that came out early 1900s about this kind of pent up young woman who's writing this diary, and she makes these very grandiose, kind of dark proclamations of her love for the devil. And it's a real book. It was a bestseller, but it's a bad book. And so that's this real book. And then this novel, I'm going to try to get this straight. It's very multi-layered. Basically, this is following this fictional boarding school for young women on the East Coast. And this diary is being passed along, and horrible things are happening at this cursed school to the women who are reading this bad book. And so the school is shuttered. It's rumored to be cursed. And then decades later, a young woman writes a book about this school that was cursed because of this real life book. And not only that, there's now a film adaptation being made about the book, about the school that was cursed by the book. So if you're still following me, there's at least 10 layers there, but it's a really interesting look of, you know, this is an LGBTQ written story. It's about female love and what it means to kind of live on the margins, and what it means to be a bad heroine in this case. It's funny. The characters are just absolutely so real, and you'll just adore them. But it's also absolutely terrifying because there might just be a real curse at the school. Joe Hill says it's simply one of the best books I've read in the last decade. I completely agree. Like, I'm obsessed with this book. It's coming October 20th. It will creep you out. It will give you nightmares. It's going to be completely worth it though, because it's one of the most unique, just fully carried out reading experiences I've ever had. So that's Plain Bad Heroines, coming October 20th. Another very, very buzzy book coming in October is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. So he wrote Rich and Pretty and That Kind of Mother, both of which were very astute cultural critiques wrapped in a literary novel. He's also a social critic. He just has a very astute eye towards like the minutia of, you know, class and race. And in this case, he is taking a certain turn where this is kind of part thriller, part horror, and it all centers on this remote Airbnb on Long Island. And you follow this middle-aged white couple, kind of upper middle class, who are renting this Airbnb in this remote location with their 2 children one hot summer. And they're going about their vacation. And then one night they receive a knock on the door, And an older couple is standing there saying they are the homeowners. They were in New York. There was this complete blackout. They didn't know what to do, so they returned home desperate, not knowing what's happening. All communications are lost. There's no power except for whatever reason, this one house. And you have these two couples. The thing that kind of is displayed right in the beginning is this older couple, they're Black. Again, you have this couple renting the Airbnb, which is white. So there's these, racial dynamics at play, but then it develops because no one knows what's happening, why communication is down, TV is down, radio is down. No one knows what's happening. And they have to kind of face this unknowable looming threat while also, again, navigating the dynamics of having these two families in a very tight space. It's just brilliant. It's tense. It's just so astute. I love the jacket as well. I just can't say enough about this book. I think this is going to blow out Rumaan in a very big way. Just the buzz it's building. You can just kind of feel it. So we're all very, very excited about this book. Again, this is one that I just was blown away by. I finished it in a couple days. Highly recommend. Great for, again, the fall season. So that's Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam, and that is coming in October. All right. So, and then last for me is another book that I was just gobsmacked by. It's just, so I don't know if any of you have read Beautiful Ruins by Jess Walter, which is number one New York Times bestseller. He never writes the same book twice, and somehow he continues just to push the envelope as far as what a literary novel can do. Every word, every page. This book is going on sale October 27th. Read one page and you'll know you're dealing with literary greatness. That's how I felt. I hadn't read Beautiful Ruins. I was going in as a clean slate, blown away. And this is a timely novel that takes place, again, at the turn of it's 1900s, Spokane, Washington. And you are following two brothers who are caught up in the fight for workers' rights. And Spokane is kind of at the forefront of this at the time. And you have one brother who's really idealistic. He's really swept up in the cause. You have his younger brother who's kind of just looking up to him, but kind of wants to fit in and just make a living. They're living on train cars. They don't have a home. And he just wants to, find a place to call his own. And in the midst of this, they become wrapped up with two women, one, a real life woman who is at the forefront of workers' rights, who's kind of leading the charge. She's only 19 years old. And then also a cage dancer who dances with bears and tigers, and she's this performer, but she's also an astute businesswoman who's ahead of her time. So it's based on real life facts in terms of what was happening at the time, but it's also just a momentous story of whether it's suffragettes, racial disparities, of course, workers' rights, things that remain just as prescient now as they ever have. And it's, again, all wrapped up in a very beautiful story of these two brothers trying to find themselves. I just can't say enough about Jess Walter's writing, though. It's propulsive, it's beautiful, it's lyrical, it's timeless. It's just a brilliant, perfect. I hesitate to say it, but I'm going to say I think it's a perfect book. I think his writing is perfect, and he's just a master. So I could go on and on about this book. I love all four of these books I've presented today. I really hope you do pick them up. I think you'll find something for you. But that's the last of it for me. So again, thank you so much for joining us and listening to us blabber about books that we love.
Chris, thank you for, as you said, a great selection and so many books for our readers to choose from. Thank you all to our publishers reps. And now we're going to turn it over to the librarians from Highland Park Public Library. So they're going to share as well the books that they're excited to be reading now and into the fall. So we'll start with Catherine. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Beth. So I'm Catherine. I think some of you will know me from the library, and my colleagues, Michelle and Sarah and I, are going to share some of the books that we are excited to be reading this fall. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is called Transcendent Kingdom by Gassi. This book came out a week ago, and it is everywhere. It is about Gifty, a neuroscience student at Stanford who is studying addiction in mice. And her mother, who is an immigrant from Ghana but now lives in Alabama, where Gifty also grew up, Gifty's mother comes to stay with her, but her mother is in the middle of a depressive episode that causes her to spend pretty much all her time sleeping in Gifty's bed. So Gifty is basically taking care of her mother, but also continuing to go to work in the lab. And as the story progresses, we get the past and present story of the whole family, including Gifty, mother, her father, who has now moved back to Ghana, and Gifty's brother, whose own addiction had tragic consequences. And as we read, we get the push and pull of Ghana and the United States, of science and religion, and of Gifty and everyone else in her life. So I really recommend this book. The second book that I'm going to talk about is Jack by Marilynne Robinson. This is another lovely book from Marilynne Robinson. It's the fourth in the Gilead series, but I think it works pretty well as a standalone, so don't worry if you haven't read all of the books, you could catch up on those later. It's about John Ames Boughton, or Jack. He's the ne'er-do-well, or maybe mostly not do well, son of Reverend Boughton. In a previous book, Jack returned home briefly to Iowa, separated wife, because in the pre-Loving v. Virginia days of this book, the law would not recognize Jack's marriage because Jack is white and his wife is black. This book tells the story of how Jack and Della Miles met in St. Louis and fell in love over poetry. Besides being white, Jack has trouble staying sober and he's semi-homeless, but for some reason, Della helped being drawn to him. So this is really a touching story about receiving undeserved love. So that's Jack by Marilynne Robinson. And the next book is actually The Search by Tana French. So Brian told you about this book, and I'm so glad that he did because his synopsis was so much better than mine. So I won't go into that too much. It's the one about Cal Hooper, as he mentioned, who's a retired Chicago cop, buys a little house on the west coast of Ireland, and of course gets drawn into a mystery because this is a mystery novel. Tana French just has so many fans. I am one of them. We're always looking forward to a new book from her. It's all the atmosphere that you love from Tana French and a satisfying mystery. And then the last book that I'm going to tell you about is actually a book of poetry. It's called That Was Now, This Is Then by Vijay Seshadri. Seshadri won the 2014 Pulitzer for poetry for his book Fictions. I can't remember what I was doing in 2014, but I was totally oblivious to that fact. But fortunately, last year, I encountered his poem Cliffhanging, which begins like this. The forces out to kill us with their benevolence are more crazed now than they were when you were alive, and more focused too. Our ingratitude excites them. They're bubbling with remedies. Their providential impulses are a nimbus of knives. Their need to tell us they love us with all their loving. So I was hooked from the beginning of this poem. And this collection includes that poem and many others. It's a melancholy collection, which makes it perfect for October. And now with some more books, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Michelle.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I am thrilled to be here to talk about some of the books that I am super excited about. So the first book that I'm going to talk about just came out last week. It's called Alone Together, Love, Grief, and Comfort in the Time of COVID-19, and it's edited by Jennifer Haupt. This is a collection of essays, poems, and interviews to serve as a lifeline for negotiating how to connect and thrive during this stressful time of isolation, as well as historical perspective that will remain relevant for years to come. Ms. Haupt rallied diverse roster of more than 90 authors. That's 69 in the print book, and then there's also an extra 22 that's both in the ebook and the audio. And these authors contributed their work to Alone Together free of charge. And some of those authors include Kawam Alexander, Nikki Giovanni, David Sheff, Lydia Yukonovich, Danny Shapiro, Garth Stein, and more. All net proceeds will be donated to the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that coordinates charitable programs to strengthen the book selling community. This collection has 5 sections: What Now, Grieve, Comfort, Connect, and Do Not Stop. And each invokes the thoughts and feelings many of us have experienced: uncertainty, unease, restlessness, grief, and hope. And now I just want to quote the editor herself, Jennifer. The privilege and reward of putting this together, this lovely monster, was that it allowed me to unite with a common good with 91 authors from diverse cultures and backgrounds. This book has developed a soul thanks to every one of them. She holds our collective pain and our dreams, and I hope she offers you what she has given to me, a renewed sense of possibilities. In telling our stories, we hope to enable you to tell your story. That's the sweet spot of connections, where the healing happens. Next, I wanted to talk about The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. You may remember Stuart Turton as the author of the amazing debut murder mystery, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which actually I remember buzzing in 2018. Well, he's back with another tale, this time aboard the merchant vessel Saradam. It's 1634, and Samuel Pepys, the world's greatest detective, is being transported to Amsterdam to be executed for a crime he may or may not have committed. Traveling with him is his loyal bodyguard, Arnett Hayes, who is determined to prove his friend innocent. But sooner are they out to sea that devilry begins to blight the voyage. A twice dead leper stalks the decks. Strange symbols appear on the sails. Livestock is slaughtered. And 3 passengers are marked for death, including Samuel. Could a demon be responsible for their misfortunes? With Pepys imprisoned, only Arnett can solve a mystery that connects every passenger aboard. A mystery that stretches back into their past and now threatens to sink the ship, killing everybody aboard. Once again, Turton writes a crafty, twisty whodunit that will keep you turning the pages. Just when you think you know who or what did it, something is thrown your way to knock you off your track. It kept me guessing until the very end, and even then it surprised me. I can't wait to be able to listen to it on audio. And last, I want to talk about a book that actually is coming out in January, but I was super excited about it, so I wanted to tell you about it now. This is a debut novel. It's called The Prophets. It's by Robert Jones Jr. On a Mississippi plantation dubbed empty by those enslaved there, 2 enslaved young men find a bit of happiness and love of each other. Samuel and Isaiah work together to not only tend the animals in the barn, which they work, but also to carve out a sanctuary from the cruelness of their world. Many don't understand the relationship, but quietly accept it, until Amos, an older man, decides to curry favor with the master by preaching the gospel. The enslaved begin to turn on their own. Isaiah and Samuel's love, which was once so simple, is seen as sinful and a clear danger to the plantation's harmony. Jones fiercely summons the voices of slaver and enslaved alike, from Isaiah and Samuel to the calculating slave master to a long line of women that surround them, women who have carved the soul of the plantation on their shoulders. As tensions build and the weight of centuries of ancestors and future generations to come culminates in a climactic reckoning, the prophets masterfully reveals the pain and suffering of inheritance, but it also shot through with hope, beauty, and truth, portraying the enormous heroic power of love. This is beautifully written and lyrical. This debut can be difficult to read, but its words and your feelings will be felt long after you finish the final pages. Then thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah.
Thanks, Michelle. So my first book today, I hope I'm on camera. Okay, my first title today is The Polar Stars by Emma Donoghue. And this came out back in July, but I wanted to mention it in case anyone missed it. I know this has been a weird year with the library being closed and then partially reopened. So I loved this book and I wanted to make sure everyone knew about it. So this book takes place in a Dublin hospital, a maternity ward of a Dublin hospital during the 1918 flu pandemic. It's a very short little novel. It takes place over the course of 3 days. The main character is the nurse who finds herself in charge of this ward, although she's not normally in charge. And it's a gorgeous little book. If you like audiobooks, the audio is read by an Irish narrator, which adds a real authenticity to the book, and the audio is only about 8 or 9 hours, so you can get through it pretty quickly. And I loved this one, and I would say if you happen to be pregnant, I might avoid reading this right now during a pandemic, but it's so worth it otherwise. The author started working on it back in 2018 and finished it in March of this year, got the first draft to her editors, and they rushed it out because this needed to be published this year during the pandemic. With that, I'll move on to my next title, which is The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein. Many of you may be familiar with Orphan Train, which she wrote years ago, but her newest novel is set in the 1840s and describes the women who were sent from, convict women who were sent from the UK to the Australian colonies. This was a period of history I didn't know very much about, and she's clearly done a lot of research. And her author's note even describes the time she spent in Australia researching this. It was a fascinating portrayal. And another one, the audio was wonderful. The narrator is Australian, and although her characters are English and Scottish and Australian, she does all the different accents and the different perspectives very well. So this one, if you're a fan of Orphan Train, I definitely recommend The Exiles. And my next title, this is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This just came out last week, and just look how gorgeous that cover is. Alyssa Cole is best known for writing romance, and actually I'm going to be talking about one of her romances next, but this title is a thriller, her first thriller, and I don't want to give very much away, but it is set in Brooklyn and is about gentrification and the role of police in the community. And it's spooky and also romantic because she writes romance very well. And another one that the audio was very well done, and I highly recommend it. And then my next slide is another Alyssa Cole pick. This is the first in her new series, Runaway Royals. So you can see down at the bottom is all of her previous series, The Reluctant Royals. This is a spin-off of that series. You do not need to have read the other ones to enjoy this, but I do recommend them. And all of them are on Hoopla if you don't want to have to wait. But How to Catch a Queen, it takes place in a fictional African monarchy called Njaza, and Sanyu, our hero, is about to become king and has to get married. The country has a tradition where the king picks a bride, and that is his bride for 4 months. It's a 4-month trial, and then he decides if she is his true queen. And Shanti has come from Thesolo, another fictional African country that is where A Princess in Theory takes place. And Shanti has come to she knows that she can become his true queen. I really enjoyed this one as well. There's a lot of politics and intrigue. This comes out December 1st, so while you're waiting, I definitely recommend checking out the Reluctant Royals series if you haven't already read those. There are 3 titles and 2 novellas, which are down at the bottom. And then finally, I stuck in one last book, and because I managed to read this in time. So if anybody read The Flat Share when it came out last year, I know it was very popular. This is the author's new novel, The Switch, and it tells the story of Lena and her grandmother, Eileen, who decide to essentially switch places. Neither's really happy with how their life is going. So Lena, who's basically had a nervous breakdown at work in London, goes to live in her grandmother's house in a little English village, and her grandmother decides to move to her London apartment to try online dating because she wants to have her one great romance before she turns 80. And this is a lovely little novel, a lot of fun, very romantic, and if you enjoyed The Flat Share, I highly recommend The Switch. And with that, I'm finished, and will thank you all for attending.
Sarah, Michelle, and Catherine, thank you guys for the great book recommendations, along with our publishers reps, Annie, Brian, and Chris. So many books to dive into, and I've added so many titles to my list. I hope that everyone listening was able to get some great recommendations. So we've opened up the chat box. If anyone has questions, you can enter your questions in the chat, and that we will ask them and hopefully answer them. While we're waiting for questions, I want to point out that the library has a special, we call it an e-postcard, that comes out weekly in September and October with news of new books. You can open it and just see at a glance what books are coming out that week or the next week. And the link is right here on the chat box if you would like to sign up for it, and you get new titles every week from mainly in September and October into your email. And then you can click on the link and go directly to the library catalog. So if you want to find out about more books, we encourage you to sign up. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box. And I'll just ask our panelists if you all have questions for each other about any of the books that anyone buzzed about. I know there were so many great choices, so many great book covers. I'm so excited to dive into them. So, and panelists, do you all have questions for each other, or? Nope, okay.
It's a long TBR pile.
Yes, yes, exactly. I've gotten titles from each of you, so I'm so excited, and we thank you all for your participation, for joining us tonight, and for sharing what we can look forward to read this fall. So I think if there's no questions, then we'll just wrap it up. And again, thank you to Brian from Penguin, Annie from Workman, and Chris from HarperCollins, and to our librarians, Sarah, Michelle, and Catherine. Thanks, guys, and good night. Oh, we have a thank you from Nicole. Nicole and Silvana both say thank you. So thanks for sharing everything. Good night.
Good night.